muli ang ating mga experts pagdating sa legal advice for immigration, ang Aquino and Low.
This American Dream segment is brought to you by Aquino and Low Law Firm, answering your immigration questions.
Kasama naman natin si Attorney Richard Low to talk about traveling outside the United States and how it affects the various groups of permanent and non-permanent residents of the U.S. We've got a lot to cover, Attorney Richard. So let's get right to it. Let's talk about the valid non-immigrant visa. What are the categories that fall under this?
Well, really what we're talking about is people that are here on a tourist visa, or particularly F1 students, or H-1Bs, which are professionals, or other groups that are non-permanent residents. And the issue there that I really want to highlight is that it's obviously you can travel in and out of the U.S. on those visas as long as you don't overstay or don't violate your status in some way. But the real issue is people don't realize that if, for example, you come into the United States as a tourist and then you become a student, you change your status to a student visa, when you go home, you basically have to start the process over again at the embassy. So you have to go back to the embassy, apply, and have them put an actual visa into your passport. So the fact that you gained a visa in the U.S. through a change of status does not entitle you to re-enter the United States with that change of status. You have to go back to the embassy and process, and basically they get a second chance to look at the whole process again. So that's an important little wrinkle that people need to know if they're in a non-immigrant status.
Okay, so if you change your status, you can't just wait for it here in America?
Well, you can. As long as you're here in the U.S., you can retain that status. But when you travel, then you have to go to the embassy and get that actual visa put into your passport.
I see. Okay, so let's move on to DACA. We're talking about the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. How does this affect this kind of status?
Well, many people have gotten DACA now, and so they are able to stay in the U.S. And there is a part of DACA that allows people to travel outside the U.S. for certain family emergencies. And you do that through an advanced parole process. And this would also be applicable to people who are in an application for adjustment of status, and they can also get advanced parole. The issue there is that you have to be careful about whether or not traveling on an advanced parole is going to bring up issues with your entry. Just because they give you advanced parole doesn't mean you're not going to have problems coming back in. So in those situations, they're a little bit tricky. It's really best to get somebody to look at your entire case to make sure you're not starting something that's going to be more problematic than just waiting for the actual status that you're looking for.
Right. So before traveling, make sure you get some advice.
Absolutely. In those categories, yes, because it's very crucial that you know what's the consequence of your travel.
Okay, and then moving on, let's talk about permanent residents, green card holders, correct?
Yeah, so permanent residents, the thing about permanent residents is they can travel in and out of the United States very freely. They just use their permanent residency card and their passport of their home country. They must present that passport and the permanent residency card when they come in, so you shouldn't travel as a permanent resident and then return as a tourist or return as in some other status. And the real issue with permanent residents is, I think, particularly for older people, you know, we like to petition our parents to come live with us in the United States, but they're kind of want to be home. And so they spend a lot of time outside the U.S. So the longer time that you spend outside of the U.S., the more likely you're going to run into problems coming back where the government is going to believe that perhaps you've abandoned your status. So maintaining your home, maintaining your taxes, those kinds of connections will be helpful to you, showing the officer that, no, I still want to come back and I have an intent to return. And some people look at the regulations that say, well, you have 180 days that you can be out without incurring problems. So they leave for 150 days and then they come back for like 3 weeks, and then they leave for 150 days and then they come back. Eventually that pattern will get you into problems because it's not just the exact number of days, it's the totality of the circumstances, whether the government believes that you have abandoned your residency, that you don't have an intent to return. So keeping that in mind is very important, that you don't want to just follow the specifics days, because you know we've had this happen where people count the number of days and says, well, I came back on day 159 and so I'm okay. Not necessarily. And the other issue with that is that it doesn't always present itself as an issue when you return. Sometimes you come back and the officer lets you in. We've had clients who've been out for years, the officer just lets them back in. But when you go to do something else, like citizenship, then they take a look at that.
Then
Then
they
they count
see that.
the days. Then they want to go back and say, well, why were you out of the U.S. for so long?
Okay, and is this different from conditional permanent residence?
Well, conditional permanent residence and permanent residence are the same as far as their being able to travel in and out of the U.S. And the other thing about being outside for both conditional and permanent residence is that you want, if you're outside more than, let's say, half the time for citizenship, which is 5 years, then you're going to have problems getting your U.S. citizenship. So you do have to have a certain amount of residency here in the U.S. in order to continue the process towards citizenship.
Okay, and let's talk about being a U.S. citizen. In this case, it's okay to come in and out, right?
Easy peasy. I get people ask me all the time, well, if I'm a U.S. citizen, will they stop me from coming back? No. Just ask Johnny Depp. He lives in France and he comes back to make movies all the time.
Although I do realize now that now there's this machine and you either get an X on your face or not. And if you do, you have to go into this really long line as opposed to the other short
So
line.
you don't want the X on your face.
You don't want the X on your face. Thank you so much, Richard, for being here once again. Invaluable advice for all of us. Maraming salamat sa Aquino and Lo. Let's check them out again very, very soon. And we'll be right back here on Kababayan Today.